Captain Emily M. Carter stood at the helm of the Vanguard, her eyes fixed on the stars outside the thick, reinforced glass of the command deck. She could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her. Earth's forces had already been wiped out. The last surviving ship, her ship, was now facing an enemy fleet that outmatched them in every way imaginable. The Vanguard wasn't much to look at, a relic from a time long gone. Its systems were outdated, its technology ancient compared to the sleek, advanced alien ships that now surrounded them. The ship's hull was covered in scratches and burns, the results of countless battles fought and lost, but it still held together. Barely. She ran a hand through her short-cropped hair, her fingers trembling. The Kaldar fleet had cornered them. The Vanguard was the last human ship left, its engines barely functioning and its weapons unable to pierce the advanced shields of the Kaldar warships. And yet somehow she wasn't giving up. Not yet. Captain, her first officer, Lieutenant Ray, said from behind her, his voice tight with anxiety. "We've got company. The Kaldar fleet is closing in. We won't survive another hit from their main guns." M turned to face him. He looked young, too young in her opinion, but his eyes showed a battle-worn wisdom. "I know, Lieutenant," she said softly. "I know." She felt it too. The Kaldar had already destroyed Earth's defenses, wiped out their fleet, and now they were here, hovering just outside the Vanguard's weakened shields, ready to deliver the final blow. It was a simple matter of time. The Vanguard was the last of humanity's strength, and she would go down fighting. But there was one thing the Kaldar didn't know. There was something aboard this ship they had never expected. M didn't want to tell Ray yet. The weapon, the ancient weapon, barely understood, untested, had been left forgotten in the ship's hold, thought to be useless for centuries. It was humanity's last hope, but the Kaldar would never expect it. It was their greatest mistake. "Captain," Ray interrupted her thoughts. "The Kaldar are signaling us. They're demanding our surrender. They want us to stand down and turn over control of the ship." M's lips curled into a half-smile. "They want to surrender us. They can try." Ray glanced nervously at the view screen. The Kaldar fleet was massive, looming in front of them like a wall of destruction. Their ships, sleek and shining with advanced technology, dwarfed the Vanguard. Each one carried weapons powerful enough to reduce cities to rubble in mere seconds. The voice of the Kaldar commander came through the comm system. "Human captain, you have fought well, but it is over. Surrender now, and we will spare you. Resist, and we will destroy you as we have destroyed your world." M didn't answer right away. She took a deep breath, her fingers still lightly resting on the controls. She wasn't ready to give in. She couldn't. She wouldn't. "Tell them," M finally said, her voice steady, "that humanity doesn't surrender." Ray gave her a long look, a mixture of concern and respect. He knew what that meant. "Aye, Captain." The comms crackled. "You are foolish," the Kaldar commander's voice returned, its tone thick with venom. "You fight a losing battle. Surrender or be obliterated." M leaned forward, staring at the dark mass of Kaldar warships. The Kaldar were ruthless, and this was the end of the road for humanity. They could feel it in the air, the finality of it all. But M had always been a soldier, and soldiers didn't give up. Her hand hovered over the control panel. There was no going back now. She had one chance, one single chance to make this fight count. "Prepare the weapon," she ordered, her voice colder than the steel beneath her feet. Ray stared at her. "Captain, are you sure? That weapon, no one's used it for centuries. We don't even know if it still works." "I don't care," M said, her voice sharp. "We either use it or we die here." Ray hesitated for only a moment before nodding. He turned to the console and began the activation sequence for the old weapon. The Vanguard systems hummed to life, powered by old, half-broken engines and energy reserves running on fumes. The weapon was in the ship's hold, buried under layers of ancient tech and forgotten history. No one had dared to touch it, let alone use it. The Kaldar wouldn't even know what it was if it fired. M glanced at the tactical display. The Kaldar fleet was preparing for the final strike. The countdown had begun. She could see the bright flashes from their weapons charging up. The Vanguard wouldn't last more than a few seconds under that kind of firepower. Her hand tightened around the chair's armrests. "Just a little longer," she muttered to herself, eyes focused on the flashing indicators that tracked the enemy fleet's position. Finally, the system pinged. The weapon was ready. "Fire," M commanded. There was a brief, deafening silence, then a blinding flash. The Vanguard shook as the ancient weapon discharged. A pulse of energy, the likes of which hadn't been seen since Earth's forgotten wars, erupted from the ship's core. It shot out like a beam of raw destruction, brighter than the sun, faster than the Kaldar could react. The first Kaldar ship didn't even have time to deploy its shields before it was torn apart. A flash of light engulfed it, vaporizing the entire vessel in an instant. The shockwaves spread out across the Kaldar fleet, and one by one, their ships erupted into fiery explosions. The energy beam cut through them like a hot knife through butter, shattering their most advanced technology as if it were paper. Lisa watched as the entire Kaldar fleet was wiped out in the span of seconds. The comms system crackled once again, but it was too late. The Kaldar fleet was no more. The Vanguard stood victorious. Captain Ray breathed, his voice filled with awe and disbelief. Did we just take out their fleet? M's hand fell from the controls, her heart still racing, but her face remained calm. The old weapon, the one no one had believed in, had worked. It had wiped out an entire enemy fleet in one shot. We did, M said quietly. Humanity did. The silence in the command deck was deafening. They had done it. Against all odds, they had done the impossible. They had just shown the galaxy that humanity could not be written off. The Kaldar may have thought their advanced technology and numbers would crush Earth, but the heart of a human soldier could not be measured by the strength of a weapon or the size of a fleet. M sat back in her chair, letting out a long breath. Get a message to Earth. Tell them humanity isn't finished yet. Ray nodded, his face breaking into a grin as he set to work. Aye, Captain. I'll make sure the message gets through. M looked out at the stars ahead of them. Earth had lost much, but they hadn't lost everything. Humanity had just shown the galaxy that there was more to them than anyone could imagine. They had their hearts, their will, and their courage. And as long as they had that, they would never fall. One day, M whispered to herself, they'll learn to respect us. And with that, the Vanguard continued its journey, the last ship of Earth, but a symbol of humanity's strength, courage, and defiance. Captain M. Carter stood frozen, staring at the wreckage of the Kaldar fleet. The aftershocks of the weapon's blast were still reverberating through the Vanguard, and her ears rang from the deafening silence that followed the explosion. A split second before, the Krathar ships had been advancing on her position, confident in their overwhelming superiority. Now they were nothing but debris floating in the cold vacuum of space. Her breath was shallow, her heart racing as she processed what had just happened. The ancient weapon, the one she had hoped but never truly believed would work, had done exactly what it was designed to do. One shot, and the entire Kaldar fleet was destroyed. Her crew was in shock, too. They had been bracing for the inevitable end, but M had made a decision. She had chosen to trust the forgotten weapon that Earth had hidden away for centuries, never expecting it to work. And it had saved them, saved her crew, saved humanity. Captain, Lieutenant Ray's voice was shaking, filled with awe. Did we just win? Did we really take down the whole fleet? M looked at him, her mind struggling to keep up with what had just occurred. The Kaldar, once thought unbeatable, had been obliterated in one shot. Her pulse raced. She still couldn't quite believe it. For a moment, there was nothing but silence in the command deck. The crew had never seen anything like it. They had been fighting for so long, surviving on outdated technology, surrounded by far more advanced and powerful forces. And now, they had done the impossible. M took a slow breath and stood, her legs shaking from exhaustion. She turned to face her crew, all of them staring at the display screens in disbelief. There were no more enemy ships in sight. The Krathar had been wiped out. Yes, she said, her voice steady, despite the whirlwind of emotions inside her. We did it. Humanity just showed them we're not done, not by a long shot. The crew broke into a stunned cheer, disbelief turning to excitement. They had survived. They had won. But M's smile was short-lived. The victory, though sweet, was still tinged with the weight of what had come before. Earth had lost everything, most of its fleet, its cities, its people. The Vanguard was the last ship standing. There was no time for celebration, not yet. She turned to the tactical officer, her gaze hardening. Status report. I want to know if there's any other fleet in the area. We can't afford to rest. The officer quickly began scanning the surrounding space, fingers flying over the controls. The rest of the crew fell quiet, their nerves still frayed, their adrenaline high. They had just survived a battle they had no business winning. M couldn't let them forget that there was still danger out there. Captain, the officer said, her voice tense, nothing on the scanners. The Krathar fleet is gone, completely wiped out. Em let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. For the first time in days, she allowed herself a moment to feel a small glimmer of hope. It wasn't over yet, but this was a victory. Humanity had fought back. But the weight of their situation still hung over her. The Kaldar were one of the most advanced races in the galaxy. She knew that this victory, no matter how sweet, was just one battle in a much larger war. The Krathar would come back. They always did. Still, Em allowed herself a moment to savor the small victory. Humanity had done the impossible. They had faced a fleet far more powerful than anything Earth had, and they had won. Her eyes flickered to the view screen, the remains of the Kaldar fleet now floating in the distance. The debris scattered across the vast emptiness of space was a silent testament to their strength. Em knew the message was clear. Humanity was a force to be reckoned with. The Kaldar would think twice before they underestimated her people again. But then another thought crossed her mind. What about the rest of the galaxy? The Kaldar weren't the only race out there. Humanity had just faced down one of the most powerful threats in the universe. Would they be able to defend themselves again? Would they be ready for the next wave? Em turned away from the screen, her mind still racing. Her crew had just won the most impossible battle they could have ever imagined, but the reality was that their fight for survival was far from over. "Ray," she said, her voice firm again, "get me a comms link to Earth. Now, they need to know what we've done. They need to know that humanity still stands." Ray nodded and worked quickly, his fingers moving over the control panel as he patched through the communication channels. The seconds felt like minutes as Em stood there, waiting. She couldn't shake the thought that Earth, her home, was still out there, waiting to hear some kind of good news. She had to give them hope. Humanity had lost so much, but they weren't gone. Not yet. The comms crackled to life, and a familiar face appeared on the screen. It was General Harris, the leader of the human resistance forces back on Earth. His eyes were bloodshot and his expression weary, but when he saw Em's face, he couldn't hide the relief that washed over him. "Captain Carter," General Harris said, his voice shaky with emotion. "We thought, after the Kaldar wiped out the fleet, we thought all hope was lost. What's your status?" Em took a deep breath. Her voice was steady, but there was an undeniable weight in her chest. "General, this is Captain M. Carter of the Vanguard. We've taken out the Kaldar fleet. We've won." There was a long pause as General Harris processed the news. His expression shifted from exhaustion to disbelief, and then finally to something else: hope. You what?" he asked, as if he couldn't quite believe what he was hearing. "We took out their fleet in one shot, General," Em repeated, her voice filled with quiet pride. "The Kaldar underestimated humanity. They thought we were weak, but we showed them we're still here." For a moment, General Harris said nothing. Then his eyes filled with tears and he nodded. "Captain, I thank you. We've been fighting this war for so long and we didn't think there would be a way out. But this changes everything. Humanity isn't finished. You've given us a chance." Em smiled, though it was a small, bittersweet smile. "We've only won one battle, General. We can't let our guard down. There's still a lot of work to be done. But for the first time in a long time, I think we've earned a little bit of hope." General Harris nodded again, his voice growing firmer. "I'll get the word out to everyone. Humanity has a chance. We'll rebuild. We'll fight. You've shown us that we can." Em felt the weight of his words settle over her. The fight wasn't over. It never would be, but today, humanity had won. And that was something no one could take away from them. She looked out at the wreckage of the Kaldar fleet, the wreckage of their enemies. A sense of quiet pride washed over her. She wasn't done fighting, not by a long shot. But right now, for the first time in what felt like forever, humanity had won. And that was something worth fighting for. The Vanguard drifted silently through space, surrounded by the wreckage of the Kaldar fleet. The vastness of the universe stretched out in every direction, but for M. Carter it felt smaller than ever. Her chest still burned with adrenaline, her body still aching from the fight, but the victory they had won weighed heavily on her mind. The Krathar fleet, once so confident in its power, had been decimated in one shot, thanks to the ancient weapon hidden deep within the Vanguard. It had been a gamble, one that almost cost them everything. But against all odds, humanity had won. For the first time in days, Em allowed herself a breath of relief. The Krathar had been a threat, a terrifying one, and now they were gone. But it wasn't over. Earth was still out there, recovering from the devastation the Krathar had caused. Her crew, their spirits lifted by the impossible victory, was still running on fumes. Their hope had returned, but Em knew the truth. This wasn't the end. This was only a small step in the long, exhausting fight for humanity's survival. The Krathar might have been defeated, but other threats lurked in the stars. "Captain," Lieutenant Ray said, his voice breaking into M's thoughts. She turned to face him, noticing the exhaustion in his face, though there was a flicker of something else in his eyes, relief. "We've received a transmission from Earth. They want to speak with you." M nodded and followed Ray to the comms station. She felt the weight of the situation once more as the screen blinked to life. General Harris, the leader of the human resistance on Earth, appeared on the screen. His expression was weary, his eyes shadowed with the burden of the long fight, but when he saw M's face, his expression softened. "Captain Carter," General Harris began, his voice full of emotion. "I can't believe what I'm seeing. You've done the impossible. The Kaldar fleet is gone, and Earth still has hope." M swallowed hard. She had been prepared for this moment, but hearing those words, hearing the quiet, deep relief in Harris's voice, made everything feel so real. Earth, the home she'd been fighting for, wasn't lost. It was still there. They still had a chance. "We did what we had to do, General," M said, her voice steady but filled with exhaustion. "The Kaldar thought they could wipe us out, but we're still here. We won today. We showed them humanity isn't something to be underestimated." Harris let out a long breath, his face filled with something M couldn't quite read. "I'm proud of you, Captain, we all are, but you've won a battle, not the war. And the Kaldar won't stay down forever. They'll be back. We need to be ready." M nodded. Harris was right. This was only a temporary victory. The Krathar's fleet was gone for now, but they weren't going to leave humanity in peace. The fight would continue. But for now, they had earned a brief reprieve. A moment of breathing room. It wasn't much, but it was enough to regroup, to rebuild. "We'll make sure Earth gets back on its feet," M said, her voice firm. "We'll rebuild, we'll train, but we need time, we need resources. We're not ready for another attack, not yet." Harris's gaze softened. "I know, Captain, but we can start. We'll send whatever we can. Supplies, reinforcements, you've given us a chance. Now we'll make sure we use it." M let out a small sigh. It wasn't a perfect solution. They didn't have everything they needed. But she had seen the light in Harris's eyes, and she knew he meant it. The fight was far from over, but humanity wasn't backing down. They had won a small victory today, and that would carry them through the dark days ahead. "We'll hold the line, General," M said. "We'll fight for Earth." The transmission ended, and M stood there for a long moment, staring at the blank screen. She didn't know what would happen next. She didn't know how long it would take for the Krathar to regroup for the next battle to come. But she did know one thing. They would be ready. They had to be. As M turned back to the bridge, she saw her crew beginning to move again. Ray was talking to the communications officer, and Lieutenant Morales was working on the star charts, checking their course. They had done the impossible, but they were still here. They were still fighting. She walked back to her seat at the helm, her hands gripping the controls with a renewed sense of purpose. The Vanguard might be a relic, a ship from a forgotten era, but it was still flying. It was still alive, just like humanity. And as long as she was at the helm, as long as her crew stood by her side, she knew they would keep fighting. The war wasn't over. There were still so many unknowns, so many dangers lurking out there in the vastness of space. The Krathar weren't the only threat. There were others, more enemies, more battles to be fought, but M wasn't afraid, not anymore. She had seen what humanity was capable of. She had seen what one human could do when they fought with everything they had. "Captain," Ray said, his voice breaking through her thoughts again. "What's the plan?" M took a deep breath, feeling the weight of responsibility settle onto her shoulders. She wasn't ready to face the rest of the galaxy. Earth wasn't ready, but they would make it. They would survive, because humans were resilient. Humans didn't give up. "First," M said, her voice steady as she looked out at the vastness of space, "we make sure Earth is safe. Then we get ready for the next fight." Ray nodded, his eyes filled with respect. "We'll be ready, Captain." M smiled faintly, her heart swelling with pride. They were a long way from winning this war, but they had won today, and that for now was enough. "We'll be ready," she repeated, "but this time we fight together." As the Vanguard sailed through the stars, its engines humming faintly, M knew one thing for sure. Humanity might be small in the grand scheme of the universe, but they had something the Kaldar and every other enemy could never take away: the heart to keep fighting, no matter the odds. And that heart, that spirit, would carry them through whatever came next. The Vanguard drifted silently through the black void of space, the debris from the destroyed Kaldar fleet still drifting in its wake. The battle was over. The fleet that had once seemed so overwhelming, so unstoppable, had been obliterated by a single blast from an ancient weapon. a weapon that no one, least of all the Krathar, had thought would work. But it had, and humanity had won. For a brief moment, Captain M. Carter allowed herself to breathe. The weight of the fight had been suffocating, and though victory tasted sweet, it was also bittersweet. She had defeated one of the galaxy's greatest threats, but at what cost? The Vanguard, battered and broken from the fight, seemed like a ghost ship now, floating in the emptiness of space. Her crew had been through hell. They had fought and bled and survived against all odds. But M knew that they couldn't rest on their laurels. The Kaldar had been defeated for now, but other enemies would come. The war wasn't over, not by a long shot. "Captain," Lieutenant Ray said, his voice steady but filled with concern, "the systems are still running at minimal capacity. We're going to need time to make repairs." M looked up at him, nodding slowly. "I know, Lieutenant, but right now we have more pressing matters." Ray hesitated. "The Kaldar fleet is gone. We've won, Captain. Shouldn't we be celebrating? Shouldn't we be taking a moment to breathe?" M's gaze turned back to the view screen where the stars stretched out endlessly, indifferent to the struggle that had just taken place. She felt the exhaustion in every part of her body. Her muscles ached. Her mind was weary, but victory hadn't come without sacrifice, and she couldn't let herself forget that. "I'll celebrate when Earth is safe," M replied quietly. "We've fought too hard and we're not done yet." Ray didn't argue. He knew better. The Vanguard had only survived because of the crew's determination, because of M's leadership. But despite the victory, there was a lingering sense of unease. Something wasn't right. The comms officer interrupted her thoughts. "Captain, we've received a transmission from Earth." M's heart skipped a beat. For the first time in days, she felt a spark of hope. It had been a long time since they'd made contact with Earth. The Krathar's relentless attacks had cut off communication, leaving her crew isolated in the vastness of space. She knew Earth had been devastated, but she had to know, was humanity still standing? "Patch it through," M said, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions swirling inside her. A familiar face appeared on the screen. General Harris, the leader of Earth's resistance forces, appeared on the screen, his face weary but determined. He looked just as she remembered, though there was a tiredness in his eyes that spoke volumes about the struggle humanity had been facing. "Captain Carter," Harris said, his voice rough but filled with relief. I'm not sure what to say. You've done it. You've actually done it." M took a deep breath, her throat tight. "We've won, General. The Kaldar fleet is gone. We took them down, but Earth still needs us. It's not over yet." Harris's face hardened, the reality of the situation setting in. "You're right, Captain. Earth been hit hard, but we're still standing. We're gathering what's left of our forces, but your victory, it gives us hope. You've shown the galaxy that humanity isn't weak, that we're not just going to roll over and die." M's heart swelled with pride. Harris was right. This wasn't just a victory for the Vanguard. It was a victory for every person on Earth who had lost someone to the Kaldar. For every man, woman, and child who had fought, who had bled, who had never given up. They had won, and now they had the chance to rebuild. "But we're not out of the woods yet," M continued, her voice firm. "There are other threats out there. The Kaldar aren't the only ones. We need to prepare for what's next." Harris nodded. "We've already started gathering reinforcements. We'll make sure Earth gets back on its feet, but right now I need you and your crew. Can you make it back to Earth?" M glanced at the Vanguard's status screen. The ship was barely holding together, its systems on the brink of failure. They'd have to make repairs, and the journey back would be dangerous, but they had no choice. "We'll make it back, General," she said, her voice unwavering. "We're coming home, but we need supplies, we need time." Harris gave her a grim smile. "Time we don't have, Captain, but we'll manage. Just get back in one piece. And when you do, you'll have the thanks of every human on Earth." M's eyes softened. "We're not done yet, General, not by a long shot, but this victory, this one battle, will be a message to the galaxy. Humanity isn't just going to fade away." The transmission ended, and the silence of space enveloped them once more. M turned to her crew, her eyes scanning the faces of the men and women who had fought by her side. They were tired, their faces drawn, their bodies exhausted. They had pushed themselves beyond their limits. They had defied the odds, but they weren't done yet. "We've done what no one thought possible," M said, her voice full of pride. "But this isn't over, not until Earth is safe." The crew nodded, their faces resolute. They had done the impossible, but there was still more to be done. "Ray," M said, turning to her first officer, "get us back to Earth. We're going to need every bit of power we can muster to make it there." Ray nodded, his eyes filled with determination. "I, Captain, will make it." As the Vanguard's engines hummed to life, M stared out at the stars. The road ahead would be difficult. There would be more battles to fight, more enemies to face. But humanity had shown something the galaxy had never seen before: resilience. They had faced the might of the Kaldar and come out victorious. And as long as she was alive, M would continue to fight. For Earth, for humanity, for everyone who believed that the spirit of a human could not be crushed. The fight for Earth was far from over. But M knew one thing for sure: humanity would rise again. And they would fight. The Vanguard drifted slowly through space, its hull groaning under the strain of its damaged systems. The crew worked tirelessly, their hands steady, but their minds clearly weighed down by the battle they had just fought, and the one that was still ahead of them. Captain M. Carter stood at the helm, her eyes fixed on the stars outside the bridge. Despite the victory over the Krathar fleet, a sense of unease gnawed at her. The battle had been won for the history books, but M knew this wasn't the end. The Kaldar weren't the only ones out there. There would be more enemies, more threats to humanity's survival. "We've won one battle," M muttered to herself, her voice barely audible. "But the war's far from over." The words felt heavy in her chest. Earth was still reeling from the Krathar's attack, still picking up the pieces after the destruction of their fleet. But now there was a flicker of hope. They had done the impossible, and humanity had just proven that they could fight back. M clung to that hope, but the weight of responsibility pressed down on her. "Captain," Lieutenant Ray's voice broke through her thoughts. "We're receiving another transmission from Earth." M didn't need to ask. She could see the urgency on Ray's face. Her heart quickened, and she took a deep breath. She knew Earth needed more than just a victory. They needed everything they could get. Reinforcements, supplies, a plan. The fight wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about rebuilding, about proving to the galaxy that humanity wasn't going to fade away quietly. "Put it through," she ordered, standing up from the command seat. Ray worked quickly, and the screen blinked to life. General Harris appeared, his face worn and tired, but his eyes filled with something else, something she hadn't seen before. Hope. He was holding on to something M had feared was long lost: belief. "Captain Carter," General Harris said, his voice filled with emotion. "It's been a long time since I've had any good news, but now, because of you, we have a chance. You've done the impossible. You've wiped out the Kaldar fleet. You've given us a fighting chance." M swallowed hard. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to feel the weight of the words, a fighting chance. She had heard that phrase so many times in her life, but now it carried a new meaning. They weren't just surviving, they were fighting. "We've taken out their fleet, General," M said, her voice steady but still edged with exhaustion. "But Earth is far from safe. We've bought some time, but we need to prepare for what comes next. The Kaldar won't stay down forever. We need reinforcements, weapons, and supplies. Earth can't rebuild if we don't have a plan." General Harris nodded, his gaze serious. "I understand, Captain. Earth been shattered. The Kaldar hit us harder than we ever expected, but we're regrouping. We'll send whatever we can. The Resistance is already making plans, but it won't be enough unless we have you back. We need you." M's heart ached. She had always known Earth was in trouble, but hearing the truth, hearing the fear in Harris's voice, made it more real than ever. They were scattered, wounded, but they weren't broken. "We'll make it back, General," M said, her voice unwavering despite the fear clawing at her chest. "We'll fight for Earth. We've proven we can do it. Now we just have to keep going." Harris's face softened. "I believe in you, Captain. I believe in humanity. We've been tested in ways we never imagined, but you've shown us that we can fight back. And now we've got to stand together." The transmission ended, and M leaned back in her seat, staring at the now blank screen. She felt a sense of pride, but it was tempered by the knowledge that Earth was still broken. There was so much more to do, so many battles to fight. "Ray," she said, her voice low but firm, "set a course for Earth, full speed ahead. We don't have much time." Ray nodded, and the ship's engines roared to life. The Vanguard slowly turned in space, its path now clear. The journey back to Earth would take time, but M knew it was the only thing they could do. They had to rebuild. They had to show Earth that humanity wasn't going to fall without a fight. The ship moved through the stars, its course set for Earth. As M looked out at the vastness of space, she couldn't help but think about everything they had lost. The Kaldar had wiped out so much: cities, military bases, families. The Earth she had once known seemed so distant now, like a dream slipping away. But she also thought about the victory, the way they had taken down the Kaldar fleet against all odds. It wasn't just a victory for her crew. It was a victory for Earth. For every man, woman, and child who had been told they were weak, insignificant, the Kaldar had made that mistake. And now humanity had shown them that they were wrong. The crew had proven something to themselves and to the galaxy. They had shown that no matter how hopeless things seemed, humanity would always find a way. But M knew that victory had come at a cost. The Vanguard was damaged. Her crew was tired, injured, and stretched thin. They had fought hard, and now they had to fight even harder to keep Earth safe. They weren't done yet. Captain, Ray called out from his station, breaking her thoughts. "We've got a problem." M turned to him, her heart racing. "What is it?" "We've picked up a distress signal," Ray said, his voice tinged with concern. "It's coming from a nearby system. It's human." M's stomach dropped. A distress signal. After everything they had just been through, they couldn't afford another fight, but she knew what had to be done. "Is it a trap?" M asked, already knowing the answer. The Kaldar weren't done yet. Ray shook his head. "I don't know, but the signal is human. We can't ignore it." M took a deep breath, her mind racing. She knew what this meant. Another battle, another fight. It was never going to end. "Set course for the distress signal," she ordered. "We can't leave anyone behind." As the Vanguard changed course, M felt the weight of her responsibility settle deeper in her chest. Earth was counting on her. Humanity was counting on her. The fight wasn't over. It wouldn't be over until every last human was safe. She turned her eyes to the stars ahead. They had won today, but tomorrow would bring more challenges. She had faced the impossible, and she would do it again, because that's what humans did. We never gave up. And M. Carter wasn't about to start now. The Vanguard drifted toward the source of the distress signal. The ship was still holding together, but M could feel the weight of every creak and groan that echoed through its hull. The crew was worn out, exhausted from the battle, from the constant struggle. But they were still moving forward. They had to be. The distress signal was weak, barely audible through the static. M knew it wasn't going to be easy to find the source. The Krathar had done a number on this part of space, leaving debris and wreckage scattered for light years in every direction. But there was something about the signal, something that called to her. "Captain," Ray's voice cut through her thoughts. "We're closing in on the signal. It's coming from a nearby asteroid field. No signs of Krathar ships, but the area's dangerous." M nodded. "I know, keep your eyes open. We don't know what we're walking into." The crew's unease was palpable. No one spoke, but the tension was there in every movement, every glance. They had just survived the Krathar's fleet, and now they were heading into the unknown, unsure of what they'd find. It didn't help that the distress signal was weak, flickering in and out of range as they approached. It could be anything. A trap, a survivor, or worse, something worse than the Krathar. M walked down the narrow corridor to the bridge, her boots echoing on the metal floor. Her thoughts were a whirlwind, but she kept her face calm, her eyes focused. She had led them through the impossible before. She would do it again. The Kaldar might have underestimated humanity, but she was no longer going to let them make that mistake. Not on her watch. "Ray," M said as she took her seat at the command chair. "What's the status?" Ray quickly checked the readings. "We're close. The signal," coming from a small asteroid in the center of the field. "The asteroid's shielded, some sort of old technology. It's not Krathar. It doesn't match any of their signatures." M's mind raced. She didn't like the sound of that. The Krathar were the most dangerous force humanity had faced, and they were everywhere. But if it wasn't them, then who or what was it? Another enemy or something else? "Bring us in closer," M ordered, her voice firm despite the unease growing in her chest. "Let's see what we're dealing with." As the Vanguard slowly moved through the dense asteroid field, M couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The shadows between the asteroids seemed deeper, the silence more oppressive. She glanced out the viewport, but all she could see was a blur of rocks and drifting debris. "Captain," Ray said, his voice tense, "we've got a visual on the source of the signal. It's a ship, but it's unlike anything I've seen before. It's old, really old. Looks like it's been abandoned for centuries." M's stomach dropped. An ancient ship abandoned in the depths of space. What had happened here? She knew the Kaldar weren't the only threat to humanity. There were other factions out there, and not all of them were friendly. "Can you get a visual on the ship?" she asked, her fingers instinctively tightening on the controls. She knew the risks. "Is there anyone alive aboard?" Ray shook his head, his eyes glued to the console. "I don't know. There's no life sign, but the ship's power is still online. It's faint, but it's there." Prepare a boarding party, M said, standing up. We're going aboard, find out who or what left this ship here. The crew looked nervous, but they didn't argue. They had fought to survive. They had taken down a fleet. Now they would face whatever secrets this old ship held. As they approached the vessel, M's thoughts turned to Earth. They had won a victory. They had destroyed the Kaldar fleet and given humanity a fighting chance. But Earth was still reeling. She could almost hear General Harris's voice in her mind, urging them to return, to rebuild, to continue the fight. The Vanguard docked with the ancient ship. The airlock hissed as the two ships connected, the only sound in the deep silence of space. M felt a cold shiver run down her spine as she and her team donned their helmets and sealed their suits. We'll go in quiet, M instructed, her voice steady. Stay alert, we don't know what we're walking into. The hatch opened and they stepped onto the ship. The corridors were narrow, dimly lit by emergency lights that flickered on and off. The ship had clearly been abandoned for years, maybe longer. The metal was rusted, the air stale. There was a musty smell that reminded Em of the old books in her childhood home, but this wasn't some forgotten archive. This was an old warship, and she had no idea what kind of dangers it held. Stay sharp, Em whispered, her eyes scanning the dark corners of the hall. If this ship has been here for centuries, who knows what's inside? The crew moved cautiously, their boots echoing on the metal floors. They passed empty rooms and rusted doors, each step bringing them closer to the heart of the ship. Then, as they rounded a corner, they found it. The control room. It was as eerie as everything else aboard the ship. The panels were cracked, wires hanging loose, and the central console was a mess of dead lights and flickering screens. But there, in the center of it all, was the source of the signal, a small, dusty device blinking with faint power. Em stepped forward, her heart beating faster now. Whatever had been on the ship, it had left behind something important. Ray stepped beside her, carefully tapping on the console. Captain, this doesn't look like any Krathar tech. It's human, old but human. Em's pulse quickened. Human? She took a step forward. Are you sure? Ray nodded, his eyes scanning the screen. The tech matches pre-war designs. From Earth's first generation of space vessels, it looks like. A sudden crackling sound interrupted him, followed by a faint voice that echoed through the room. Help! Em froze, her heart skipped. The voice was weak, raspy, but unmistakably human. Did you hear that? Ray asked, his voice tight with shock. Em's eyes widened. Yes, she breathed, we're not alone. The voice came again, this time louder, desperate. Help! Earth, please help! Em's mind raced as she signaled her team to move quickly. She was certain now there was someone aboard this ship, someone who had been trapped here for who knows how long. Follow the signal, Em ordered, her voice steady but filled with urgency. We need to find them now. As they moved deeper into the ship, Em's thoughts were filled with questions. Who had sent the distress signal? How had they survived all this time? And why had this ship been abandoned? One thing was certain, whatever answers they were about to find, they would change everything. This wasn't just about fighting for survival anymore. This was about discovering humanity's past and the secrets buried within the depths of space. They had won one battle, but now they were on the edge of uncovering something far bigger than anything they could have imagined. The dark corridors of the abandoned ship seemed endless. The low hum of the Vanguard's engine barely cut through the eerie silence. M. Carter led her team deeper into the ship, each step growing heavier with anticipation. The distress signal they'd tracked had only grown clearer, but still, they hadn't found the source. The flickering lights cast long shadows across the rusted walls. The ship had clearly been untouched for decades, perhaps longer. Yet there was something unsettling about the whole situation, something that made the hairs on the back of Em's neck stand up. Captain, Lieutenant Ray's voice broke through the silence. We're almost there, the signal coming from ahead. Em nodded, her steps deliberate, her senses alert. She could feel the weight of the moment. Whatever they were about to discover would shape the future of humanity. This could be the key to understanding what happened to this ship and why it had been abandoned, and who was still alive, if anyone. They came to a heavy door at the end of the hall, sealed shut by years of neglect. The control panel beside it flickered, and Ray stepped forward to try and access it. The door hissed and groaned as the machinery came to life. It's barely working, Ray muttered, but I think we've got it. With a final push, the door slid open with a mechanical screech. Beyond it, the room was dark, too dark. M's heart skipped a beat as her flashlight illuminated the inside. The room was filled with rows of old cryopods, their glass windows covered in grime. Some were shattered, others were still intact. The faint hum of the pods suggested they were still powered, though barely. A figure stood in the center of the room, barely visible in the dim light. A human figure. "Help," the voice came again, now stronger but filled with desperation. M's blood ran cold. There was no doubt anymore, someone was alive. "Stay back," M whispered to her crew as she cautiously approached the figure. She couldn't make out the details of the person, but the voice was unmistakably human. The figure turned slowly, and M's flashlight revealed a face she hadn't expected to see. A woman, older, her skin pale and drawn with deep lines etched across her face. Her hair, once dark, was streaked with gray. But her eyes, those eyes, they were unmistakable. She looked, haunted, as if the years had taken everything from her. Who are you?" M asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The woman's gaze flickered to M, then to the crew behind her. Her lips parted, but the words seemed to struggle to leave her mouth. I am Commander Myra Ellis, from the Genesis." M's heart stopped for a moment. The Genesis? She had heard the name in history books, but it couldn't be. That ship had disappeared over a century ago, during Earth's first great conflict with the Krathar. Its disappearance had been a mystery. No one knew what had happened to it. But here in front of her was proof that the Genesis wasn't lost. It had been forgotten, left to drift in the void. And Myra Ellis, the last person from that mission, was still alive. "How is this possible?" Ray asked, his voice full of awe and confusion. "The Genesis vanished without a trace. How are you still alive?" Myra Ellis took a deep breath, steadying herself before speaking again. Her voice was shaky, but there was a fire in her eyes, a fire that had clearly not gone out despite everything she had endured. "We were abandoned," she said quietly, her voice filled with sorrow. "The Genesis was sent on a mission to explore new territories, to fight the Krathar where they thought we wouldn't reach them. But something went wrong. The ship was crippled in a battle. We were lost, left to drift. The Krathar thought we were dead, and the people we were supposed to report back to, they never came." Myra's eyes glistened with unshed tears. She turned toward one of the cryopods, which was still sealed. "I was put in cryosleep to survive, but the systems malfunctioned. They failed. I woke up alone, no one else, no ship, just silence." M felt her throat tighten. The weight of Myra's words was crushing. The Genesis was one of Earth's last hopes against the Krathar, and it had failed. "Why didn't anyone find you?" Ray asked, his voice soft, sympathetic. "Why were you left here?" "I don't know," Myra replied, her voice trembling now. "I've spent all these years alone, surviving as best I could, trying to stay alive. There were others who were in cryosleep with me, but they didn't wake up. I don't know why. I'm the only one left." M's heart ached for her, but there was a spark of hope. Myra Ellis had been alone for so long, trapped in the emptiness of space. Yet she had survived. She had endured. And now, with humanity facing the Krathar and other unknown threats, Myra was the key to something bigger. "We're not leaving you here," M said, her voice firm, filled with the same determination that had kept her alive through this battle. "You're coming back with us. Earth still needs you. Humanity needs you." Myra's eyes widened. "Earth, is it? Are they still standing? I thought the Krathar." "We've survived," M said, her voice low but filled with conviction. "We've won a battle, but we're not done yet. The Krathar may be gone, but there are other threats out there. We need your help, Commander. We need to rebuild. And we need to know what happened to the Genesis, what secrets it holds." Myra Ellis looked at M, her eyes full of uncertainty and grief, but there was something else there too, hope. It had been so long since she had thought Earth was still standing. It had been so long since she had believed in the possibility of survival. But now, standing in front of these humans, people who had defied the Krathar, who had proved that humanity was not finished, she saw a glimpse of that hope again. "I will help," Myra said, her voice stronger now, filled with a renewed purpose. "I'll do whatever it takes. I owe it to those who didn't make it. I owe it to humanity." M smiled, a wave of relief washing over her. She had found someone who could help them understand the past, help them fight the future. They weren't alone, not anymore. With Myra now aboard the Vanguard, they had a new ally, a living piece of history who had witnessed the early days of the war with the Krathar. But M knew this was just the beginning. The fight ahead was still uncertain. They had a long road ahead of them, but for the first time in a long time, humanity had a chance. M took a deep breath, her heart swelling with pride. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but together they would rebuild, they would fight, and they would show the universe that humanity wasn't done yet. She turned to the crew, the resolve in her eyes clear. Prepare to head back to Earth. Let's make sure they know that humanity is coming home. As the Vanguard's engines roared to life, M looked out into the endless stretch of space. There was so much ahead of them, but for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid. Together, they would face whatever came next.